The Guardian's Oath, Part 2. Welcome back to Moonlit Romance Audiobooks. This is Part 2 of The Guardian's Oath. If you haven't listened to Part 1 yet, the link is in the description below. Ready to continue? Let's go! The story continues as Elena begins her training in earnest, as the search for new guardians begins, and as she discovers that her connection to Kael might be more than just professional. The Seeker may be gone, but the realms face new threats and new mysteries are waiting to be uncovered in the sanctuary's endless libraries. Elena stood in the light of the reformed thresholds, her hands still warm from where Kael's had held it. Around the nexus, the new doorways pulsed with gentle radiance, 7 points of light, stable and strong, no longer fractured or bleeding into each other. The Seeker was gone. Aldrich Thorne had found peace, and reality itself seemed to exhale in relief. "We did it," Marcus breathed, leaning heavily on his staff. Though he'd lost his threshold, he was alive, and his eyes held wonder rather than despair. "We actually did it." Lydia sank to her knees, her threshold clutched to her chest, tears streaming down her face. "Sarah," she whispered to the air, to the memory of her sister, "we finished what you started." Kael stood apart from them all, his light blade finally sheathed, his amber eyes fixed on Elena. She felt the weight of his gaze, felt something unspoken passing between them in the aftermath of battle. "You transformed his darkness," Kael said quietly. "I've been a warden for 3 decades. I've fought the Seeker 100 times, and in one day you did what none of us could manage in a lifetime." Elena looked down at her threshold. It glowed steady and sure, no longer pulsing with urgent warnings. "I just listened to what it was trying to tell me, that the Seeker wasn't our enemy, he was a victim. Someone who needed saving, not destroying." "Most people see only enemies or allies." Kael moved closer, and Elena's breath caught at the intensity in his expression. "You saw a broken man who deserved compassion. That's what makes you dangerous, Elena Thorne." "Dangerous?" "To people like me who've forgotten how to see past the fight." His hand lifted, almost touching her face, then dropped. "You make us remember what we're fighting for. Not just survival, but the possibility of something better." The air between them felt charged, electric. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd known this man for barely a day, had spent most of that time either terrified of him or fighting alongside him. And yet, "The thresholds are stabilizing," Marcus called out, breaking the moment. "Look!" The 7 lights were growing brighter, spreading their glow across the nexus. Where they touched the ground, grass began to grow impossible, beautiful grass in a space between worlds. Flowers bloomed in Fast Forward, their petals shimmering with colors that didn't exist in any single realm. "The balance is restoring itself," Lydia stood, wiping her eyes. "The Seeker's corruption is being undone. The realms are healing." Elena watched in awe as the transformation spread. The nexus, which had been a barren, in-between space, was becoming something extraordinary. Trees sprouted, their leaves made of crystallized starlight. A stream appeared, its water flowing uphill and down simultaneously, reflecting skies from a dozen different worlds. "This is what the Nexus was meant to be," Kael said softly, "before the Seeker's corruption twisted it. A meeting place, a garden between worlds." As they watched, figures began to appear in the distant shapes materializing from the 7 thresholds. People. No, not just people, beings from across the realms, drawn by the restoration of the balance. A woman made of living water stepped through one portal, her form rippling with currents and tides. From another came a man whose skin was bark, whose hair was leaves. More followed, a child wreathed in gentle flames, an elderly woman who seemed to be made of moonlight, a warrior whose armor was forged from storm clouds. "The Guardians," Marcus whispered in awe. "The new Guardians are being called." Elena understood. The 7 thresholds were choosing their protectors, drawing them from across reality to take up the oath that her bloodline and 6 others had once sworn. The water woman approached Elena first, moving with the grace of a river. When she spoke, her voice was like waves on sand. You freed us from the shadow. You restored what was broken. We are in your debt, bookshop guardian. I'm not, Elena started to deny it, but her threshold pulsed warmly. She was a guardian. She'd accepted that truth when she'd chosen to fight rather than run. You owe me nothing. This is everyone's fight, everyone's responsibility. The water woman smiled, and it was like sunlight on ocean waves. Spoken like a true guardian, my name is Nerida. I protect the threshold of tides, the doorway to the realm of living waters. She placed a hand over her heart in formal greeting. It will be an honor to stand with you. One by one, the other new guardians introduced themselves. Rowan of the Living Wood, Ember of the Sacred Flame, Luna of the Silver Path, Tempest of the Storm Reaches, Obsidian of the Stone Deep. And finally, a young man who seemed to shift between solid and smoke, introducing himself as Shade of the Twilight Veil. 7 thresholds, 7 guardians, the circle complete. The sanctuary will need to expand, Lydia said, practical even in the face of wonder. We'll need chambers for each guardian, libraries for each realm's knowledge, training grounds. One thing at a time, Kael interrupted, but his tone was gentle. First, we make sure the thresholds are truly stable. Then, we plan for the future. As if in response to his words, the thresholds flared brightly, and a new structure began to form in the center of the nexus. Stone rose from the impossible grass, shaping itself into 7 pillars arranged in a circle. At the top of each pillar, a book appeared, not the thresholds themselves, but reflections of them, like the monitoring system in the sanctuary, but more permanent, more powerful. The Guardian Circle, Nerida breathed. It's recreating itself. I've seen this in the old texts, the stories from before the first corruption. Elena approached the circle cautiously. In the center, where the 7 pillars focused their light, something else was forming. A pedestal, and on it, the prime threshold. Kael's voice was barely a whisper. I thought it was lost, destroyed when Aldrich tried to merge the 7. The book on the pedestal was larger than the others, bound in material that seemed to be every substance, and none leather and metal and light and shadow all at once. It didn't pulse or glow. It simply was radiating a sense of absolute rightness. What does it do? Elena asked. It maintains the balance, Shade said, his form flickering between visible and transparent. Each threshold connects 2 realms, but the prime threshold connects to all of them and to none. It's the center, the anchor that keeps the entire network stable. And it needs a guardian, Elena realized, understanding flooding through her. Someone to watch over all 7 thresholds, to ensure the balance holds. The new guardians looked at each other, then at Elena. The answer was obvious to everyone. No, Elena said firmly. I just became a guardian yesterday. I don't know what I'm doing. I can't possibly… You converted the Seeker's darkness into light? Rowan said, his wooden features creasing into what might have been a smile. You saw past the monster to the man. You united us by ending the threat that scattered us. If not you, then who? Elena looked at Kael, desperate for him to offer another option, but he was staring at the prime threshold with an expression she couldn't read. It makes sense, Kael said finally. The prime guardian should be someone not bound to a single realm. Someone who sees all worlds as equally worth protecting. Someone who… He stopped, his jaw tight. Someone who what? Elena prompted. Someone I would trust with everything, he finished quietly. Their eyes met, and Elena saw it then, not just respect or gratitude, but something deeper, something that made her pulse race and her breath catch. But before she could respond, the prime threshold flared with brilliant light. Elena felt it calling to her, felt the weight of the choice settling on her shoulders. She could refuse. Walk away, return to her bookshop, let someone else take this burden. Or she could accept, become not just a guardian, but the prime guardian, the keeper of the balance between all worlds. She thought of her grandmother, of the quiet strength in her eyes, of the bookshop filled with volumes in languages she'd been taught to recognize but never translate, of all the small preparations that had led her to this moment. Her grandmother had known, maybe not the specifics, but she'd known that Elena would face this choice, and she'd prepared her as best she could. Elena stepped forward and placed her hand on the prime threshold. The world exploded into sensation. She felt everything, every realm, every doorway, every point where reality touched reality. She felt the living waters singing in their depths, the living wood growing in its ancient forest, the sacred flame dancing in its eternal hearth. She felt the storm reaches roaring with perpetual tempest, the stone deep grinding in its patient darkness, the silver path glowing with moonlit magic, and the twilight veil shifting between shadow and light. And she felt the connections between them all, the delicate threads that wove the realms together into a tapestry of existence. It was too much, too vast. She would drown in it, lose herself in the infinite. Then Kael's hand closed over hers, anchoring her. "Breathe," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You don't have to hold it all at once. Let it flow through you, not into you." Elena focused on his voice, on the warmth of his hand. She stopped trying to contain the vastness and simply let herself be part of it. The overwhelming pressure eased. The prime threshold's power settled into her bones, her blood, her being not as a burden, but as a truth. When she opened her eyes, the world looked different. She could see the thin places, the spots where realms brushed against each other, could feel the pulse of the threshold, 7 hearts beating in perfect rhythm, could sense the new guardians, bright points of determined light. And she could feel Cal standing so close, his hands still over hers, not just his physical presence, but something deeper, a connection forged in battle and sealed by trust. "Welcome, Prime Guardian," Nerida said formally, and the others echoed her, their voices blending into a chorus of welcome. Elena looked at them, her fellow guardians, these impossible beings from impossible realms, and felt something settle in her chest. Purpose, belonging, home. "Thank you," she said. "I'll do my best to be worthy of this trust." "You already are," Kael said, and finally released her hand. The loss of his touch felt like a physical ache. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity and wonder. The sanctuary expanded rapidly, responding to the presence of 7 active thresholds and their guardians. New wings sprouted from the central library, each one attuned to a specific realm. The Wing of Waters contained books bound in kelp and coral, their pages inscribed with flowing script that rippled like waves. The Wing of Wood housed volumes carved into living bark, their words growing and changing like forest seasons. Elena spent her mornings learning from each guardian, understanding their realm's unique properties and dangers. Afternoons were devoted to studying the prime threshold, learning to sense disturbances in the balance, to feel when a doorway was being stressed or threatened. And her evenings were spent with Kael. It had started innocently enough. He'd offered to teach her basic combat, arguing that a prime guardian needed to defend herself. Elena had agreed, figuring she should probably learn more than swing an encyclopedia at people's heads. But their training sessions had become something more. "You're holding the blade too tight," Kael said, circling her in the sanctuary's new training courtyard. "Let it become an extension of your arm, not a weight you're carrying." Elena adjusted her grip on the practice light blade. It wasn't a real warden's weapon, Kael had explained. Those took years to properly attune, but it held enough energy to practice with. "Like this?" She swung experimentally. "Better. Now, when I attack, don't try to block directly. Redirect. Use my momentum against me." He demonstrated, moving through the forms with liquid grace that made her throat dry. How was it fair that someone could look so good while pretending to kill her? "Ready?" Kael asked, taking his starting stance. Elena nodded, adjusting her own position. She'd gotten better over the past 3 days. Not good, but better. She could usually last a full minute before Kael disarmed her now. He moved, light blade flashing toward her in a controlled strike. Elena swept her blade up, angling it to deflect rather than block. Kael's momentum carried him past her, exactly as he'd shown her. "Excellent!" He turned, approval bright in his amber eyes. "Now counterattack while I'm—" Elena was already moving, pivoting to strike at his exposed side, but Kael was faster, spinning his blade to intercept hers. Their weapons met with a clash of light, and suddenly they were too close, barely inches apart. Good instinct, Kael said, his voice lower now. But telegraph your moves less. I saw your weight shift before you moved. How? Elena demanded, acutely aware of the warmth radiating from his body. You weren't even looking at my feet. I was looking at your eyes. His gaze held hers, intense and unreadable. They gave you away. You decided to attack a split second before your body moved. So I need to learn to control my eyes too? Elena tried to keep her tone light, but it came out breathier than intended. No. Kael's hand came up, his fingers barely grazing her cheek. Your eyes are perfect, honest. They show exactly what you're thinking. And what am I thinking now? The question escaped before Elena could stop it. Kael's expression shifted, something heated and dangerous entering his gaze. That you want me to kiss you. Elena's breath caught. That's very presumptuous. Am I wrong? She should step back, should laugh it off, restore the proper guardian-warden professional distance. Should do anything except what she did, which was tilt her face up and whisper, "No, you're not wrong." Kael's control, which had held firm through 3 days of increasingly charged training sessions, finally broke. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was fire and need, and 3 days of barely restrained wanting released all at once. Elena's light blade clattered to the ground as her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer. Kael's arm wrapped around her waist, the other hand cupping the back of her head, angling her mouth to deepen the kiss. Elena had been kissed before, awkward first kisses in college, a few dates that led to pleasant but unremarkable makeout sessions. Nothing that had prepared her for this, for the feeling of lightning in her veins, for the way Kael's mouth moved over hers, like he was learning a language he'd been desperate to speak, for the breathless, dizzy sensation of falling and flying simultaneously. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kael rested his forehead against hers. That was, he started. A terrible idea, Elena finished, but she was smiling. The worst, he agreed, his thumb tracing her jaw. Completely inappropriate. You're a prime guardian. I'm a warden. There are rules about… Rules that say we can't? Elena's hands were still twisted in his shirt, holding him close. Rules that say it's complicated. Kael pulled back enough to meet her eyes. Elena, I've lived for 73 years. I've been a warden since I was 20. I've watched guardians fall, watched the realms bleed, watched everything I tried to protect crumble. He stopped, his jaw tight. I'm not good at this. At feeling things beyond duty and responsibility. Then why did you kiss me? Elena asked softly. Because for 3 days, I've watched you be extraordinary, watched you unite the guardians, master the prime threshold, bring hope back to a fight we'd almost given up on. Watched you light up the sanctuary just by walking through it. His hand slid to her waist, firm and possessive, and I couldn't not kiss you anymore. I couldn't keep pretending I was just your trainer, your warden, your protector. What do you want to be instead? Elena's heart was racing, her pulse pounding in her ears. Yours, Kael said simply, if you'll have me, even though I come with baggage, even though I don't know how to be anything but a soldier, even though loving a warden is… Loving? Elena interrupted, her voice barely a whisper. Kael froze, his eyes widening as he realized what he'd said. That is, we've only known each other 4 days. I shouldn't have… Elena kissed him, cutting off his stumbling retraction. This kiss was softer than the first, less desperate and more deliberate, a promise instead of an explosion. When she pulled back, Kael looked slightly dazed. I don't care that it's only been 4 days, Elena said firmly. I don't care about rules or complications or propriety. These 4 days have been more real than my entire 26 years before them. So yes, I'll have you, baggage and all, soldier and all, for however long you'll stay. Forever, Kael said immediately. I'd stay forever. Then it's a good thing I'm immortal now, Elena teased, referring to the prime threshold's gift guardians age slowly, living for centuries to properly protect their charges. A very good thing, Kael murmured, pulling her close again. They might have stayed there all evening, trading kisses in the training courtyard, if Marcus hadn't cleared his throat very loudly from the doorway. Sorry to interrupt, he said, not sounding sorry at all, a grin splitting his face. But Lydia sent me to tell you that dinner's ready. And also that she's collecting bets on how long it would take you two to finally admit you were in love. And I'm losing because I said a week. 4 days, and you couldn't even make it to. Marcus, Kael's voice held a warning, but his arm stayed firmly around Elena's waist. Right. I'll just go tell Lydia you'll be along shortly. Marcus backed away, still grinning. But for the record, I think it's great. You both deserve happiness, even if you cost me 20 realm credits. When he was gone, Elena looked up at Kael. Were we that obvious? Apparently, Kael said dryly, though to be fair, I was fairly certain I was being subtle. You really weren't, Elena laughed. You've been scowling at anyone who got too close to me for 3 days straight. That's just my normal expression. It's really not. Kael sighed, but his eyes were warm. Fine, I'm terrible at hiding my feelings. Are you happy? Incredibly, Elena said honestly, stretching up to kiss him once more. Now come on, if we're late to dinner, Marcus will never let us hear the end of it. Hand in hand, they walked toward the sanctuary's great hall where the other guardians and wardens were gathering for the evening meal. Elena felt the prime threshold's warmth in her chest, felt the steady pulse of the 7 doorways maintaining their perfect balance. 4 days ago, her biggest concern had been a late book shipment. Now she was the prime guardian of 7 realms, the keeper of the balance between worlds, and somehow impossibly in love with a 73-year-old warden who looked 30 and kissed like he was trying to memorize her soul. Life was very strange and absolutely perfect. Enjoying part 2? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more romantasy audiobooks. Now, back to Elena and Kael. The attack came 3 days later, in the darkest hour before dawn. Elena woke to alarms screaming through the sanctuary, not physical sounds, but psychic warnings that blazed through her connection to the prime threshold. Something was wrong, very wrong. She was out of bed and running before fully waking, her threshold clutched in her hand. The corridors were chaos, guardians stumbling from their chambers, wardens racing toward defensive positions, the very walls of the sanctuary shuddering under some unseen assault. What's happening? Elena demanded, catching Lydia's arm as the older guardian rushed past. The twilight threshold? Lydia gasped, her face pale. It's under attack. Something's trying to force it open from the other side. Elena's connection to the prime threshold flared, and suddenly she could see what Lydia meant. In her mind's eye, the twilight threshold shade's doorway was being battered by something massive, something that reeked of familiar corruption. But that was impossible. The Seeker was gone. Aldrich had found peace. They'd watched him fade into nothing. Unless... It's not the Seeker, Kael appeared at her side, already armed and armored, but it's something like it, another entity consumed by hunger for the thresholds. How is that possible? Elena demanded, running beside him toward the Guardian Circle where the prime threshold stood. We restored the balance. We stopped the corruption. We stopped one threat, Kael said grimly. That doesn't mean there aren't others. They burst into the Guardian's Circle to find Shade already there, his form flickering rapidly between solid and smoke. He held his threshold a book bound in twilight shadow, and his face was twisted in concentration and pain. It's been trying to break through for an hour, he gasped. I've been holding it back, but it's getting stronger. It knows where the threshold is. It's targeting it specifically. Elena's mind raced. The Seeker had taken a century to locate and destroy 4 thresholds. This new threat had found one in less than a week. Let me see, she said, stepping forward with the prime threshold. Let me connect to it. Elena, no. Kael started, but she was already opening her awareness, letting the prime threshold's power flow through her to touch Shade's doorway. The moment she made contact, she felt it. Not one entity, many, dozens, perhaps hundreds of smaller corruptions, fragments of shadow and hunger, each one a tiny echo of what the Seeker had been. They were battering at the twilight threshold like a swarm, trying to overwhelm it through sheer numbers. Fragment seekers, Shade breathed. I've heard legends, but I never thought when the original seeker was destroyed, his essence didn't vanish. It scattered, broke into pieces. And those pieces are still hungry. Elena's blood ran cold. They hadn't ended the threat, they'd multiplied it. How many? She demanded. In my realm, dozens across all realms. Shade's form flickered violently. Hundreds, maybe thousands, small enough that they can't breach a threshold alone, but if they work together... The twilight threshold shuddered under a massive coordinated assault. Shade cried out, dropping to his knees. The book in his hands began to crack, thin lines of darkness spreading across its cover. Shade! Elena lunged forward, but Kael caught her. You can't touch a threshold that's being corrupted, he said urgently. It'll spread to you and through you to the prime threshold. If that falls, everything falls. Elena wanted to scream with frustration. There had to be something she could do. She was the prime guardian, the keeper of the balance. She couldn't just stand here and watch. Wait? The memory hit her with the force of revelation. The seeker. The way she'd converted his darkness to light by using the threshold to transform it. I need to connect through the prime threshold, Elena said. Not to Shade's threshold directly, but through the network. Use the balance itself to stabilize him. That's never been done, Lydia said, materializing beside them with the other guardians. The prime threshold isn't meant to be used that way. It's an anchor, a reference point, not a weapon. But it's a connection, Elena insisted. It links all 7 thresholds. If I can channel power from the other 6 into Shade's, distribute the load. You'll burn out, Kael said flatly. 6 thresholds worth of power flowing through you at once? Elena, that would kill you. Then I'll be careful not to let that happen, Elena said, more confidently than she felt. But we're out of options. Look at him. Shade was now completely solid, unable to shift, his form locked by the strain of holding his threshold closed. The cracks on the book's cover were spreading, and through them, Elena could see something trying to push through writhing shadows with hungry, grasping forms. Do it, Shade gasped. Prime Guardian, if you don't try, I'll fail anyway. At least this way, there's a chance. Elena looked at Kael. His jaw was tight, every line of his body radiating rejection of this plan. But after a long moment, he nodded. If you die, I'm going to be very angry with you, he said, trying for lightness and failing utterly. Noted, Elena said, then turned to the other guardians. I need you to open your connections to your thresholds, not physically keep your books secure, but lower your defenses enough that I can draw on the power of your doorways. Nerida stepped forward first, placing her hand over her heart. The threshold of tides is yours to command, Prime Guardian. One by one, the others followed. Rowan, Ember, Luna, Tempest, Obsidian, each one offering their threshold strength. Elena felt them opening like flowers, felt the vast power that thrummed through each doorway. She placed her hands on the prime threshold and opened herself to the network. The power hit her like a tidal wave. 6 thresholds, 6 realms, 6 sources of pure fundamental reality pouring through her body. She felt like she was being simultaneously drowned, burned, frozen, crushed, torn apart, and reformed. Every cell in her body screamed in protest. But she held on. Because this was what it meant to be the Prime Guardian. Not just to maintain the balance, but to become the balance. To be the point where all things met and found equilibrium. Elena focused through the agony and reached for Shade's threshold. The connection locked into place, and she felt the Fragment Seeker's assault directly. They were countless tiny voids, each one hungry for power, for substance, for the energy that would let them grow into what the original Seeker had been. But they were also small, weak, fragments. And fragments could be healed. Elena didn't attack them. Instead, she surrounded them with the combined power of 6 thresholds, water and wood, flame and moonlight, storm and stone, and offered them what they truly sought. Not more corruption, but completion, a way to become whole without consuming, to exist without destroying. One by one, the Fragment Seekers stopped attacking. The smallest ones dissipated entirely, their corrupted essence purified by contact with 6 sources of pure elemental power. The larger ones began to transform, their shadow forms taking on substance and color. In moments, they were no longer manifestations of hunger, but tiny entities in their own right, will-o-wisps of twilight, small creatures of shadow and spark that danced harmlessly in the spaces between realms. As the last fragment seeker transformed, Elena felt Shade's threshold stabilize. The cracks in its cover sealed, the darkness that had been seeping through faded, the twilight doorway was secure. Elena released the power of the 6 thresholds, cutting her connection to the network. The world spun, her legs gave out, strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. "I've got you," Kael's voice, rough with worry. "I've got you." "Did it work?" Elena managed to ask, her vision blurring. "It worked," Shade said, his voice filled with wonder. He was standing now, his form shifting smoothly between solid and smoke again, fully restored. "You didn't destroy them. You healed them. Prime Guardian, you turned fragments of the Seeker into harmless shadow sprites." "Good," Elena mumbled. "That's good." Then darkness claimed her, and she knew nothing more. Elena woke in her chamber, sunlight streaming through windows that looked out over the sanctuary's impossible gardens. Her body ached like she'd been trampled by an army, but she was alive. Finally, Kael's voice came from beside the bed. "You've been unconscious for 18 hours. Do you have any idea how—" His voice cracked. "Don't ever do that to me again." Elena turned her head to find him sitting in a chair, pulled close to the bed, his elbows on his knees, his face haggard. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. "I'm sorry," she said, her throat raw, "but Shade needed—" "I know what Shade needed," Kael interrupted. "And I know you did what you had to do. That doesn't mean I have to like watching you nearly die." "I didn't nearly die," Elena protested. "Elena, your heart stopped. Twice. Lydia had to use healing magic from the Silver Path to restart it. Your body started breaking down at a cellular level from the power overload." "You absolutely nearly died." Kael's hand found hers, gripping tight. "And if you ever do something like that again without at least discussing it with me first, I swear I'll—" "You'll what?" Elena asked gently. "I don't know," Kael admitted. "Be very upset, possibly yell, definitely worry myself sick." He brought her hand to his lips. "Elena, I've been a warden for 5 decades. I've learned to accept loss, to understand that sometimes people die in this fight, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. But with you?" He stopped, his amber eyes bright with unshed tears. "I can't accept it, I won't. So please, please be more careful." Elena's heart squeezed. She freed her hand from his grip only to cup his face, bringing him closer. "I promise to be as careful as I can be, but Kael, I'm the Prime Guardian. Part of my duty is taking risks that others can't." "I know," he said miserably. "I just hate it." "I'm not particularly fond of it either," Elena admitted, "but the alternative is letting people like Shade face those risks alone. And I can't do that." Kael closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "I know. It's one of the things I love about you, your absolute inability to stand by when someone needs help." He opened his eyes again. "Doesn't mean I have to like it." "Fair enough," Elena said. "How is Shade?" "Perfectly fine. The twilight threshold is stable." And more importantly, Kael's expression shifted to something like wonder. "The transformation you did is spreading." The fragment seekers across all the realms are being drawn to the healed ones, and the healing is passing from fragment to fragment like a cure to a disease. Elena sat up, ignoring the way her vision swam. "You mean—" "You didn't just heal the fragments attacking Shade's threshold. You created a cascading effect that's healing all of them. Thousands of potential seekers all being transformed into harmless shadow sprites." Kael shook his head. "Elena, you didn't just save one threshold. You may have ended the seeker threat permanently." The weight of that settled over Elena like a blanket. No more fragment seekers, no more corrupted entities trying to destroy the balance. The realms would be truly safe. "So it's over?" she asked. "We won?" "This particular threat, yes. But," Kael's expression turned serious. Elena, there's something else. Something the other guardians discovered while you were unconscious. Dread pooled in Elena's stomach. What? The fragment seekers weren't naturally occurring. Someone created them, deliberately shattered the seeker's essence, and scattered it across the realms. Who would do that? Elena demanded. And why? We don't know yet, but whoever they are, they knew about the thresholds, knew about guardians, and they specifically targeted the moment after we defeated the seeker. Like they were waiting for us to weaken ourselves. Kael's hand tightened on hers. Elena, I think we have a new enemy, someone who understands the thresholds as well as we do. Maybe better. Elena's mind raced. Could it be another corrupted guardian? Someone from the original 7 families? It's possible, or it could be something else entirely. A realm walker we haven't encountered, a being from beyond the 7 realms. Kael stood, pacing the room. The point is, we need to be ready, and you need to be at full strength. How long until I recover? Elena asked, testing her arms and finding them shaky but functional. Lydia says a week, maybe 2. Kael stopped pacing to look at her. Elena, I want you to rest. Actually rest. No training, no guardian duties, no pushing yourself to recover faster. A week is a long time for something to go wrong, Elena protested. And if you burn yourself out permanently by not healing properly, that's forever. Kael countered. We have 7 guardians, 3 wardens, and an entire sanctuary of protective wards. We can manage for 1 week. Elena wanted to argue, but her body chose that moment to send a wave of exhaustion through her so strong she swayed where she sat. Fine, she conceded, 1 week. But if anything urgent happens, then we'll wake you, Kael promised. Now lie back down before you fall down. Elena obeyed, sinking back into the pillows with relief she tried to hide. Will you stay? She asked, the question smaller than she'd intended. Kael's expression softened. I'm not going anywhere, he said, settling back into his chair and taking her hand again. Sleep, Elena. I'll keep watch. Wardens, Elena mumbled, already drifting off. Always so dramatic. The last thing she heard before sleep claimed her was Kael's quiet laugh. The week passed slowly for Elena, confined to bed rest while her body recovered from channeling 6 thresholds worth of power. But it wasn't entirely unpleasant. Kael spent every evening with her, sometimes reading aloud from the sanctuary's vast collection, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. The other guardians visited regularly, bringing news of the realms and tales of their worlds. Nerida taught her about the living waters, about cities built in coral palaces beneath waves that sang with ancient magic. Rowan spoke of forests so vast and old that trees remembered the first dawn. Ember described the sacred flame, a hearth that had burned since before time began, tended by beings of pure passion and purpose. Luna shared stories of the Silver Path, a realm where moonlight was solid enough to walk on, where dreams took physical form. Tempest told of the storm reaches, where lightning was a language and thunder a song. Obsidian spoke little, but his silence held the weight of mountains and the patience of stone. And Shade, grateful for his rescue, brought Elena shadow sprites, the transformed fragment seekers. They were tiny things, no bigger than her thumb, made of twilight and mischief. They perched on her windowsill and performed elaborate dances, weaving light and shadow into temporary pictures. They're drawn to you, Shade explained. You're the one who gave them peace. They think of you as their creator in a way. That's both adorable and slightly concerning, Elena said, watching as a shadow sprite attempted to braid another's tail with predictably chaotic results. They're harmless, Shade assured her. Mostly, they like to play pranks, but nothing dangerous. A guardian in my realm keeps a whole colony of them as companions. They're actually quite useful for scouting and delivering messages. By the end of the week, Elena had a dozen shadow sprites that refused to leave her windowsill, and she'd learned more about the 7 realms than she'd thought possible. She felt stronger, both physically and in her understanding of her role. The prime threshold, which she kept at her bedside, pulsed with steady reassurance. The network was stable, the fragment seekers were healed. And for the first time since becoming a guardian, Elena felt like she truly understood what she'd taken on. On the 8th day, Lydia declared her recovered enough to move about the sanctuary, though she still forbade strenuous activity. Elena celebrated by immediately going to find Kael, who was training in the courtyard with Marcus. She watched from the doorway as they sparred, both moving with the fluid grace of experienced warriors. But where Marcus fought with economical efficiency, Kael fought like poetry, every movement precise and beautiful and deadly all at once. When he spotted her, Kael immediately stopped mid-strike, leaving Marcus an opening that the younger warden took advantage of, tapping Kael's side with his practice blade. "Dead," Marcus announced cheerfully, "killed by your girlfriend while you were busy making eyes at her." "She's not my—" Kael started, then stopped, looking at Elena. "Are you? My girlfriend, I mean. Is that the appropriate term? I'm not current on modern relationship terminology." Elena's heart did a complicated flip in her chest. "I don't know. Are we in a relationship?" "I'd like to be," Kael said seriously, completely ignoring Marcus's poorly suppressed laughter. "If you're interested, I know I said I'd stay forever, but I never actually formally asked if you wanted—" "Yes," Elena interrupted, crossing the courtyard to stand before him. "Yes to relationship. Yes to girlfriend. Yes to all of it." Kael's smile was brilliant, transforming his usually serious face into something breathtaking. He pulled her close, mindful of her still healing state, and kissed her softly. Get a room," Marcus said, but his tone was fond. "Though, for the record, I think you two are disgustingly cute together." "Thank you, Marcus," Elena said dryly. "Your approval means everything." "As it should," Marcus agreed cheerfully. Then his expression turned more serious. "Actually, I came to find you both. Lydia's called a council meeting. She's discovered something about our mysterious enemy." Elena and Kael exchanged looks and followed Marcus to the great hall, where the other guardians and wardens were already gathering. Lydia stood at the head of the table, several ancient texts spread before her. She looked tired, but triumphant. "I found it," she announced as everyone took their seats. "The answer to who shattered the Seeker's essence and why." "Who?" Kael demanded. "Not who, what?" Lydia tapped one of the open books. "This is the Codex of Eternal Shadows, one of the oldest texts in the sanctuary. It describes a phenomenon called the Echo of Hunger." "Sounds ominous," Marcus muttered. "It is," Lydia agreed. "According to the Codex, the Echo of Hunger is what happens when a being of pure corruption is destroyed without their essence being properly cleansed. The corruption itself develops a kind of proto-consciousness, not intelligent, but aware, and it seeks to recreate what it once was." Understanding dawned on Elena's face. The Seeker wasn't shattered by an enemy. He shattered himself, or rather, his essence did, trying to survive destruction. "Exactly," Lydia confirmed. "When Aldrich found peace and faded, his human consciousness ended, but the corruption that had consumed him that didn't want to die. So it fragmented, scattered itself across the realms, hoping that if enough pieces survived, they could eventually reform." "But Elena healed the fragments," Nerida said. "Transformed them into shadow sprites, so the threat is ended, yes?" "Not quite," Lydia said grimly. "Because according to the Codex, the Echo of Hunger has one final defense mechanism. If the fragments are destroyed or transformed, it will try one last time to recreate itself, and to do that, it needs power, massive amounts of power." "Like, for instance, the prime threshold," Kael said quietly. Everyone turned to look at Elena. "It's coming for me," Elena said, the certainty settling in her bones. "That's the endgame. The fragments were never the real threat, they were bait. A way to get me to reveal myself, to use the prime threshold's full power so it could locate me." "We need to evacuate you," one of the wardens said immediately. "Hide you somewhere the Echo can't find you." "That won't work," Shade said. "If it's truly an echo of the Seeker, it can sense thresholds, especially the prime threshold. There's nowhere Elena can hide that it won't eventually find her." "Then we fight," Tempest said, their voice rumbling like distant thunder. "We're stronger together. 7 guardians, 3 wardens, the sanctuary's defenses. Let it come." We'll destroy it. The Codex says that won't work either, Lydia said. The echo of hunger doesn't have a physical form to destroy. It's pure corruption, seeking a vessel. If we fight it traditionally, it will simply flow around our defenses until it reaches its target. Then what do we do? Rowan asked. Elena looked down at the prime threshold in her hands. She could feel it now, a distant but growing presence, moving through the spaces between realms, hunting her. The final echo of Aldrich Thorne's corruption, seeking one last chance to consume and corrupt. An idea formed in her mind, terrible and brilliant and absolutely insane. We give it what it wants, Elena said quietly. The room erupted in protests, but she held up a hand for silence. Listen, the Echo wants the prime threshold's power. It needs that power to reconstitute itself, to become a new seeker. But what if, Elena's grip tightened on the book, what if I let it into the prime threshold but on my terms? Let it try to consume the power but use that connection to do to it what I did to the fragments. Transform the corruption from the inside. That's suicide, Kael said flatly. Elena, you nearly died channeling 6 thresholds. The echo of hunger will have the concentrated corruption of a century of the Seeker's existence. If you try to purify that much darkness, it will kill you. Maybe, Elena admitted, but I'll have the prime threshold's full power at my disposal, and more importantly, I'll have all of you. 7 guardians, 7 thresholds, all linked through the network. If we work together, combine our strength. It might work, Nerida said slowly. The power of 7 thresholds, all focused through the Prime Guardian, might be enough to transform even the Echo of Hunger. Or it might burn Elena out like a candle, Kael argued. We need another option. There isn't one, Lydia said quietly. The Codex is clear. The Echo can't be fought, can't be hidden from, can't be negotiated with. It can only be transformed or allowed to succeed, and if it succeeds, a new seeker rises, Obsidian rumbled, and we begin this cycle again. The weight of that settled over them all. Another century of fighting, another slow loss of guardians and thresholds, another inevitable march toward the collapse of all realms. Unless Elena stopped it now. When will it arrive? Elena asked. 3 days, Lydia said. Maybe 4. It's moving through the Twilight Realm now, following the traces of your power from when you healed the fragments. Then we have 3 days to prepare, Elena said, looking around the table at her fellow guardians, at the wardens who'd become friends, at Kael, whose eyes held a mixture of pride and terror. 3 days to figure out how to end this threat once and for all. And if we fail? Marcus asked quietly. Elena met his eyes steadily. Then you seal me and the Echo together in the prime threshold and cast it into the void between realms where it can never reach another guardian. No, Kael's voice was absolute. We're not even considering that option. We have to consider every option, Elena said gently. Kael, if I can't transform the Echo, if it consumes me and gains access to the prime threshold's power, it won't just create a new seeker, it will create something worse. Something that can control all 7 thresholds. We can't let that happen. Then we'll make sure you succeed, Kael said fiercely, because that's the only acceptable outcome. Elena wanted to argue, to make him promise that he'd do what was necessary if she failed, but looking at his face, she knew he'd never make that promise. He'd fight to save her until his last breath, even if it meant risking everything. It was foolish and reckless and completely against proper warden protocol. And she loved him for it. All right, she said, then let's make a plan to win. The Echo of Hunger arrived on the dawn of the 3rd day. Elena felt it breach the sanctuary's outer defenses, a wave of pure wrongness that made her skin crawl and her threshold burn hot in her hands. She stood in the Guardian's circle, the prime threshold open before her, the other 7 guardians arranged around the circle's perimeter with their own thresholds glowing. Kael stood at her right hand, his light blade drawn and blazing. The other wardens had taken positions at the entrance to the circle, ready to defend against any physical manifestation the Echo might produce. Remember the plan, Elena said, her voice carrying to all assembled. When the echo enters the prime threshold, I'll use its connection to begin the transformation. But I'll need power, lots of it. That's where you all come in. Feed me your threshold strength slowly and steadily. Don't overwhelm me, but don't hold back either. We need everything we have. And if it starts to go wrong, Nerida asked. Then you all pull back immediately and seal the circle, Elena said. Don't try to save me, just contain the echo until... If it starts to go wrong? Kael interrupted. We double our efforts. Pour more power in, not less, because we're not losing you today, Elena. That's not how this story ends. Elena wanted to argue, but the echo was close now. She could feel it at the edges of the sanctuary, testing the wards, searching for the fastest path to its target. It's here, she said. The echo of hunger didn't enter the circle so much as materialize within it. One moment the space was clear, the next it was filled with shadow, not solid darkness, but an absence of light so complete it seemed to devour even the concept of illumination. Elena's breath caught as she felt the weight of its hunger. This wasn't like the fragment seekers, small and confused. This was the concentrated essence of a century's worth of consumption and corruption, the pure, distilled need to devour everything. And it wanted her. The echo surged toward the prime threshold, and Elena dropped every defense, opening herself completely to its assault. The corruption poured into her, into the prime threshold, seeking the vast power it had sensed. Pain exploded through Elena's body. It felt like being unmade, like every cell was being simultaneously frozen and burned and torn apart. The echo's corruption spread through her veins like poison, turning her blood to ice, her bones to ash. Now, she gasped, barely able to form words. The 7 guardians responded instantly, their thresholds blazed to life, power flowing through the network and into Elena. Water and wood, flame and moonlight, storm and stone and shadow, all of it pouring through her body, through the prime threshold, meeting the echo's darkness with elemental light. The battle was joined within Elena's soul. She could feel the echo trying to consume the power flowing into it, trying to use the threshold's energy to reconstitute itself into something terrible and new. But Elena was ready for that. She'd spent 3 days studying the Codex, learning every scrap of information about corruption and transformation. She knew that darkness wasn't the absence of light, it was light trapped and twisted, and what was trapped could be freed. Elena stopped trying to fight the echo's hunger and instead fed it. Not raw power, but purified energy channeled through 7 different elemental sources. She let it drink deep of the living water's cleansing currents. Let it taste the living wood's patient growth. Let it burn in the sacred flame's passion and freeze in the silver path's dreams. The echo recoiled, confused. This wasn't what it expected. This wasn't corruption to feast on, but purity to endure. More, Elena gasped, and the guardians responded. The power flowing through her doubled, then tripled. Elena's body began to glow with inner light, bright enough that Kael had to shield his eyes. But he didn't step back, didn't pull away. His hand found hers, gripping tight, offering his own strength, even though he had no threshold to channel. I'm here, he said. I'm here, and I'm not letting go. Elena used his anchor to steady herself, to remain present in her body, even as 7 realms worth of power and a century's worth of corruption warred within her. She could feel herself fraying at the edges, feel her consciousness starting to dissolve under the strain. But she could also feel the echo changing. The hunger was still there, but it was becoming something else. Not need, but want. Not consuming, but growing. The echo had been driven by the simple directive to survive, to recreate what it had lost. But Elena was showing it another path: transformation instead of replication, evolution instead of resurrection. The darkness within her began to brighten, corruption shifting to potential. The echo's singular consciousness split, fragmented, became not one terrible entity, but thousands of individual sparks of awareness. Elena recognized them. Shadow sprites. The echo was becoming shadow sprites, just like the fragments had. But there were so many, hundreds upon hundreds, all being born at once, all needing to be guided through the transformation. Elena's power reserves were depleting rapidly. She could feel her body starting to fail, could feel her heartbeat becoming erratic. "I can't," she gasped. "There are too many. I can't finish." "Yes, you can," Kael's voice cut through the chaos. "Elena, listen to me. You're not alone. You have 7 guardians feeding you power. You have 3 wardens standing guard. You have an entire sanctuary's worth of protective magic supporting you. And you have me, and I will never, ever let you fall." Elena wanted to believe him, but she could feel herself slipping, feel the transformation starting to reverse as her concentration wavered. Then she felt something else. More power, but different. Not from the guardians or their thresholds. This was coming from everywhere, from the sanctuary's walls, from the impossible gardens, from the streams that flowed uphill and the trees made of starlight. The sanctuary itself was feeding her power. "The sanctuary is alive," Lydia's odd voice reached Elena. "It's a construct of pure balance, and it's responding to your need. Elena, the sanctuary recognizes you as its prime guardian. It's giving you everything it has." Elena seized that power and poured it into the transformation. The echo's final fragments brightened, shifted, became. Shadow sprites burst from her body in an explosion of twilight and stars, thousands of them, more than had ever existed before. They swirled around the guardian circle in a massive spiral, dancing and singing in voices like wind chimes, and at the center of the spiral, Elena collapsed. Kael caught her before she hit the ground, lowering her gently as the other guardians rushed forward. The prime threshold in Elena's lap pulsed once, twice, then went still. Around the circle, the 7 guardian thresholds dimmed, their power exhausted. "Elena?" Kael's voice was raw with fear. "Elena, please, open your eyes." Elena's eyes fluttered open. Her body felt like it had been through a war, but she was alive. More than alive, she felt cleansed, renewed, like something fundamental had been purified within her. "Did it work?" she whispered. "Look," Shade said, pointing upward. The shadow sprites filled the sky above the sanctuary. So many, they blotted out the sun. But instead of darkness, they brought twilight, a gentle, peaceful gloom that was restful rather than frightening. "The echo is gone," Lydia confirmed, tears streaming down her face. "You transformed it, all of it. There's not a trace of corruption left." "And the sanctuary gave you a gift," Nerida added, gesturing to the gardens around them. "Look." Elena turned her head to see that where the shadow sprites had touched the ground, new plants were growing shadow flowers that bloomed with petals made of twilight, beautiful and strange. The sanctuary had incorporated the transformed echo into its very structure, making permanent what might have been temporary. "You didn't just defeat the threat," Kael said, his voice full of wonder and love. "You turned it into something beautiful." Elena managed a weak smile. "That's what Prime Guardians do, apparently. Transform things." "Rest now," Kael said, lifting her carefully. "You've earned it." As he carried her toward her chambers, shadow sprites swirling in their wake, Elena let herself relax into his arms. The threat was ended. The realms were safe. And she had her warden, her fellow guardians, and a home in the sanctuary. For the first time since her bookshop's shelves had started glowing, Elena felt truly at peace. 3 months later, Elena stood in her bookshop, dust motes dancing in the afternoon sunlight. The shop had been restored, though not quite to its original state. Kael and the other guardians had helped her rebuild it, but they'd made some modifications. Now, hidden behind a false wall in the back was a doorway. Not a portal exactly those required thresholds to create, but a stable passage that allowed Elena to travel between her shop and the sanctuary with a simple step. She decided to keep the shop running, partly because she loved it, and partly because someone needed to maintain a presence in the mortal realm, to watch for any new threats that might emerge. But mostly because it was hers and she wasn't ready to give it up. The bell above the door chimed, and Kael entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the cafe down the street. "I still can't believe you're running a bookshop," he said, handing her a cup. the prime guardian of 7 realms, defender of the balance between all existence, and you spend your mornings helping college students find textbooks. It grounds me, Elena said, accepting the coffee gratefully. Besides, someone has to maintain the old wards. My grandmother wove protection spells into every shelf in this place. They're still active, still keeping minor corruptions at bay. This shop is a guardian in its own right. Kael's expression softened. She'd be proud of you, your grandmother, for everything you've accomplished. I hope so, Elena said. She still missed her grandmother fiercely, even 3 months later, missed the conversations they might have had, the questions she'd never gotten to ask. But she had her grandmother's legacy, the shop, the books, and the knowledge that every guardian in her bloodline had walked this same path, had faced their own version of these impossible choices. Ready for tonight? Kael asked, changing the subject. Tonight was special. The Guardians had called a formal gathering, the first since the defeat of the Echo. All 7 Guardians, all 3 Wardens, and representatives from each of the realms would be attending. It was part celebration, part strategic planning, and part just a chance for everyone to be together without an active crisis. Ready? Elena confirmed. Though I'm still not sure about the formal robes. Do I really have to... Yes, Kael said firmly. You're the prime guardian. There are certain ceremonial expectations. Elena groaned, but didn't argue further. She'd learned that Kael could be surprisingly stubborn about matters of tradition and protocol. It was almost cute how seriously he took these things. They finished their coffee in comfortable silence, then locked up the shop and stepped through the hidden doorway into the sanctuary. The evening's gathering was held in the Great Hall, which had been decorated with flowers from all 7 realms, coral blooms from the living waters, wooden vines from the living wood, flame lilies from the sacred flame. The other guardians were already there, resplendent in their own ceremonial robes. Nerida wore flowing garments that seemed to be made of water itself, constantly moving and rippling. Rowan's robes were woven from living vines, growing and changing as he moved. Ember blazed in reds and golds, their clothes seeming to flicker with real flames. Luna's robes shimmered with moonlight, casting silver shadows. Tempest's garments crackled with barely contained lightning. Obsidian wore stone-gray robes that looked heavy but moved like silk. And Shade's twilight-colored clothes shifted between visible and transparent with every breath. Elena looked down at her own robes, deep purple with gold threading that formed patterns of books and doorways, and felt a surge of belonging. She was one of them, a guardian. Part of something vast and important and beautiful. The formal part of the gathering passed in a blur of speeches and toasts. Representatives from each realm brought gifts and words of gratitude. The shadow sprites, now permanent residents of the sanctuary, performed an elaborate aerial display. But the best part came later, when the formality dissolved and it became just friends celebrating together. Stories were shared, laughter echoed through the hall, and Elena found herself dancing with Kael to music played by realm walkers on instruments that shouldn't exist. "Happy?" Kael asked as they swayed together. "Incredibly," Elena admitted. 3 months ago, I was terrified I'd made the wrong choice. That, becoming a guardian, meant giving up everything I loved. But instead, I gained so much more. Like a 73-year-old boyfriend who still can't quite figure out modern dating, Kael teased. Especially that, Elena said, stretching up to kiss him. Though you're getting better, last week you only referred to me as the prime guardian twice during our date. I'm trying, Kael protested. It's hard to separate the role from the person when the person is so extraordinary at the role. Flatterer, Elena accused, but she was smiling. As the night wore on and the celebrations continued, Elena found herself standing at the edge of the hall, looking out at the assembled guardians and wardens, her found family, her team, the people she'd fight beside and laugh with and protect until the end of her very long life. Marcus approached, 2 drinks in hand. He'd become a good friend over the past months, his cheerful irreverence a perfect counter to Kael's seriousness. Credit for your thoughts? He offered, handing her a glass of something that sparkled and tasted like starlight. Just thinking about how much has changed, Elena said. 4 months ago, I was shelving books and worrying about late shipments. Now I'm the prime guardian, dating a warden, and responsible for maintaining the balance between 7 realms. Don't forget, you also transformed the Echo of Hunger into a colony of adorable shadow sprites, Marcus added. That one's my favorite. Elena laughed. That one surprised me too. You know what I think? Marcus said, his tone turning more serious. I think you were always meant for this, not because of your bloodline or your grandmother's oath, but because of who you are, someone who sees the potential for good in everything, even in corruption and darkness. That's very philosophical of you, Marcus. I have my moments, he said with a grin. Now, come on, Narrate is about to tell the story of how she accidentally flooded an entire city trying to impress someone she liked. You don't want to miss this. Elena let herself be pulled back into the celebration, into the warmth and laughter and love. Later, much later, when the gathering finally wound down and the guardians retreated to their chambers, Elena and Kael walked through the sanctuary gardens. The shadow flowers bloomed around them, and shadow sprites danced in the air, following Elena like tiny twilight guardians. In the distance, the 7 thresholds glowed softly, perfectly balanced, perfectly safe. I love you, Elena said suddenly, the words bubbling up without warning. Kael stopped walking and turned to face her fully. I love you too, he said, more than I thought I could love anything. You terrify me and amaze me and make me hope for futures I'd long since given up on. Like what? Elena asked softly. Like this, Kael said, gesturing to the garden, to the peaceful night, to the stable thresholds. Peace, real, lasting peace, not just the absence of active war. And like us, a life that's not just duty and fighting, but also quiet moments and laughter and love. We can have that, Elena promised. The threats will come, they always do, but we'll face them together. And in between, we'll have this, the sanctuary, our friends, each other. Kael pulled her close, and they stood there in the garden for a long moment, just holding each other under stars from 7 different skies. In her pocket, the prime threshold pulsed with contentment. The balance was maintained. The realms were safe. And Elena Thorne, bookshop owner turned prime guardian, had found her place in the impossible spaces between worlds. It wasn't the life she'd planned. It was so much better. And as shadow sprites danced around them and the sanctuary hummed with ancient magic, Elena knew that whatever came next, whatever new threats or challenges or adventures awaited, she would face them with the strength of 7 thresholds, the love of a warrior who'd waited 73 years to find her, and the unshakable certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The story of the Guardian's Oath was complete. But the story of Elena and Kael, of the 7 guardians and their protection of the realms of magic and love and impossible choices, that story was just beginning. The end of part 2. Epilogue. 3 years later, Elena sorted through the newest shipment of books, humming softly to herself. The afternoon sun streamed through the bookshop windows, casting familiar patterns on the well-worn floor. A shadow sprite dozed on the counter, curled up like a cat made of twilight. The bell chimed, and a young woman entered, looking around with wide, uncertain eyes. Can I help you find something? Elena asked automatically, then stopped. The woman's gaze was fixed on a particular shelf, the shelf Elena's grandmother had told her to always watch, the shelf where certain books called to certain people. One of the books was glowing. Elena's heart skipped a beat. She reached for the prime threshold in her pocket, felt its confirming pulse. Another guardian had been called. The young woman approached the shelf slowly, drawn by something she couldn't name. When her fingers touched the glowing book, her eyes went wide with shock and wonder. What? She started. Elena smiled, remembering another afternoon, another glowing book, another life about to change forever. Welcome, she said warmly. My name is Elena, and I have so much to tell you about the responsibilities you've just inherited. The woman looked at her, fear and curiosity warring in her expression. Is this real? The visions, the doorways, All real, Elena confirmed, and terrifying and wonderful and completely overwhelming. But you're not alone. There's an entire sanctuary full of people ready to help you. And trust me, she thought of Kael, of her fellow guardians, of everything she'd learned and lost and gained. It's worth it, every impossible moment of it. The woman clutched the threshold to her chest. I'm not sure I can do this. None of us are, Elena said gently. But we do it anyway, because someone has to protect the thresholds. Someone has to maintain the balance. And apparently she gestured to the glowing book that someone is you. As Elena led the new guardian toward the hidden doorway, shadow sprites swirling around them in welcome, she thought about how far she'd come from that first terrified day. About the battles fought and the loves found and the impossible becoming possible. Somewhere in the sanctuary, Kael would be training new wardens. The other guardians would be tending their realms, and reality itself would continue spinning in its delicate balance, protected by those who'd answered the call. The bookshop door closed behind them, the wards shimmering as they passed through. Another guardian joining the fold, another story beginning. And Elena, prime guardian of the 7 thresholds, smiled as she stepped into the light. Thus ends the Guardian's Oath. May your thresholds remain guarded, your love remain true, and your books always lead you to where you belong. Thank you for listening to The Guardian's Oath Part 2, the conclusion of Elena and Kael's story. If you enjoyed this, please like this video and subscribe to Moonlit Romance Audiobooks for more free romantasy and sweet romance audiobooks. Haven't listened to Part 1 yet? The link is in the description. New stories drop every week. Until next time, take care.